11 combined national championships, 4,213 combined all-time wins. North Carolina and Indiana, the Hoosiers and the Tar Heels are getting together for the Big Ten ACC Challenge once again this year. Jacob Rude from Locked On Hoosiers, myself, Isaac Shade from Locked On Tar Heels. We're going to talk about it today.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Monday, July 11th, 2022. Welcome into the Locked On Hoosiers and Locked On Tar Heels crossover. It is the dog days of summer, and we want to get ahead and start looking towards what's going to happen this upcoming late fall. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and Jacob Rude, the host of Locked On Hoosiers. We're so glad to be with you. We want to thank you for making our shows your first listen every single day. Please don't forget, we're free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, so please go ahead and subscribe right now. For those of you watching on YouTube, smash the like button and leave a comment about why you love these two great blue blood programs. We'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. 15 all-time matchups. The Hoosiers lead the series 9-6. They've actually, I was looking back on the head-to-head, they've flipped back and forth the past 5 games. So let's talk about this matchup, Jacob. What do you foresee for the Hoosiers coming into this year?
Yeah, this is an interesting IU team. Last year under Mike Woodson was a lot of uncertainty. We didn't really know what to expect. It was a really soft non-conference schedule as he kind of figured some things out. And then they struggled a lot during Big Ten play, eventually got things right at the last possible second and snuck into the tournament. But the good news for IU fans is they bring back effectively that entire team. They lost 2 guards, but they're adding a pair of 5-star recruits, which is very rare for, maybe not very rare, but rare for Indiana maybe than some of the other top programs. But they get Jalen Hood-Schifino, a guard, Malik Renault, a forward, that are coming in as they were 2 top 25 prospects. And so you're adding that to a team that was built around Trayce Jackson-Davis. And obviously he's going to be the kind of highlight of IU's team this season. And every matchup he's in, he's going to be kind of the key focus for everyone. But it was a team that really started to figure things out at the end of last season. And because they're bringing just pretty much everyone back from that team, the idea is they're going to be able to hit the ground running and heading into this next season. And they beefed up their non-conference schedule. This game against UNC is kind of the kickoff of about 2 weeks where they're going to play UNC. They're going to have some sort of Big Ten game, and then they're going to go to Las Vegas to play Arizona, and then they're going to go to Kansas, Fog Island Fieldhouse, to play that one as well. So this matchup is going to kind of kick off a stretch of games where we're going to really find out a lot about Indiana.
Yeah, and same is true of the Tar Heels, coming off a year where obviously they struggled for a lot of the year as well. Let's not mince those words, and then got it together at the right time all the way till the national championship game, and bring 4 out of the 5 of those starters back. And so there are high hopes for the Tar Heels as well. We would imagine, assuming both these teams do what we think they'll do in the earlier part of November, this should come in as a top 25 matchup. Everyone I've seen, every national college basketball voice has said this is the prominent matchup of the entire challenge between the Big Ten and ACC, which has been dominated by the Big Ten in recent years. And so that'll be really interesting, and I think is going to be a great measuring stick for both squads, who both bring back a lot of what they had last year, as you said, and then both bring in a quality recruiting class. And so a great opportunity at home for Indiana to start off that stretch you were just talking about, and a great opportunity for Carolina to go on the road to a place where, frankly, they've struggled the past couple times they've been there, as we've talked about. And so is this veteran core for the Tar Heels going to be able to be tough enough to do what they need to do to make this a competitive game where either team could win down the stretch. So, Jacob, we're going to talk, obviously, here in just a couple minutes about the big matchup in the post between Trayce Jackson-Davis and Armando Bacot. But before we get to them, because that's the highlight, we want to save that. Any other real highlights for the Hoosiers in terms of what you think might make for an interesting matchup in this game?
Well, IU hung its hat last season on defense, and they were the best team in the Big Ten based on KenPom for much of the season defensively. They were one of the top 20 in the nation defensively. So that's kind of been the calling card for IU. Well, that's what it was last season, I should say, under Mike Woodson, was that defense. Now, the problem was it kind of came at the expense of offense last year, and it was not pretty basketball for large stretches of the game. There was a big reliance on Trayce Jackson-Davis to kind of bail IU out a lot, and that kind of shifted more toward the end of the season. They kind of realized they became a pretty heavy pick and roll team toward the end of the year, and especially when they made a run through the Big Ten tournament and into the NCAA tournament. And Trayce Jackson-Davis talked this season pretty openly, actually, about wanting to focus more on offense and figure out how to score, basically, as opposed to just putting everything into the defense. Because while it kept IU in a lot of games, it led to a lot of really frustrating losses because IU finishes just like a couple made baskets away from pulling off a big win, and they were unable to do that. So just kind of that balance. The defense isn't going away, and Trayce Jackson-Davis kind of anchors that. They have some really strong guards on the perimeter that kind of help anchor that out there on the perimeter itself. But just kind of that balance between how good you want to be defensively and how much you want to focus on that, and then trying to figure out some things offensively. And some of the new faces that are coming in, Jalen Hood-Schifino, he's going to start from day one, and he's going to bring a different dynamic to the team as well. So him and Xavier Johnson are going to be a really interesting backcourt that should be able to complement one another and should be able to help IU create more, because last year it was a team that was pretty much built around Trayce Jackson-Davis, and it was some shooters around him and throw it into the post and watch him work. And when defenses figured out they could just put 5 guys in the paint, IU couldn't figure it out for a while. So the idea is there are more guys now available that can create their own shot, knock down shots from the outside, that makes it a little less one-dimensional.
Yeah, and it's funny because Carolina is kind of the flip of that. They excelled on efficient offense last year and struggled at times to find the defense. Obviously, they did much better with that as the season progressed. And so the big question mark then is you've got 4 of these 5 starters back, but you lose Brady Manek, who was a huge contributor at the stretch 4 spot, which took a lot of the presence away from Armando Bacot inside. And so now Carolina brings in a Big Ten transfer from Northwestern, Mr. Pete Nance. And so the question becomes, how is he going to fit alongside Bacot? Will he be able to be that stretch 4 and bring some of the pressure away, so we ultimately get mano-a-mano with Trayce Jackson-Davis and Armando Bacot in the paint, which is the matchup everyone's looking forward to. In fact, we're going to talk much more about that in just a second, right after I tell you about LinkedIn. As the summer comes up and small businesses are back in action, LinkedIn Jobs makes it easier to grow your team. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the people you want to interview faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job and purple #hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and ultimately hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs as the #1 in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Really excited for this matchup between Armando Bacot and Trayce Jackson-Davis. What are you looking forward to that? Let's talk about some of the banter that they've had back and forth.
Yeah, I was gonna say we might be looking forward to it, but I think they're looking as much forward to it as anyone. They were. It was the same day that Trayce Jackson-Davis announced he was returning to IU and withdrawing from the draft, that he's out here tweeting at Armando Bacot to come to the crib for the ACC Big Ten Challenge, and they were tweeting at one another. I don't know how much that played into the ACC and Big Ten scheduling them. It seemed like these two teams were probably always going to be playing one another this season. But I love watching these matchups because there's just not a ton of them anymore, especially as someone who mainly covers the NBA. You just don't really see these types of old school big man matchups going back and forth against one another on each end of the floor. So I love watching this, and it's two guys who, kind of like I said, are a little more traditional big men that post up, back guys down, and score in that way. So I'm excited to watch these. Trayce always seems to embrace that challenge and has had some really big games against Kofi Coburn was one of them in the Big Ten ACC Challenge, who Mike Woodson straight up told him that he had kind of punked him in previous games, and he played like he was scared, and he went at him and dominated him in that Big Ten tournament game. So he's someone that kind of rises up to the challenge with these matchups, but this is going to be probably the toughest one he's going to have all season long.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so interesting. You talk about that NBA side of things. As we know now on this side of the NBA draft, Kofi Coburn goes undrafted because the NBA just doesn't value this skill set as they used to. Vernon Carey from Duke a couple years ago should have been a top 3 pick. He dominated college basketball, but was picked in the second round. Luka Garza from the Big Ten last year, the year before. National Player of the Year, was like 52nd in the draft, and we just see this trend over and over again now, and is probably in big part why that, along with NIL, why we get Trayce Jackson-Davis, why we get Armando Bacot, Drew Timme, Hunter Dickinson, all these big men coming back to school who are going to, frankly, be the face of college basketball now and own that. And it's huge because in this NIL era, they can profit in major ways off of coming back. And so I love what you're talking about with Trayce Jackson-Davis rising to the occasion in these matchups. And I think that's going to be what the country needs to get all in on college basketball in November, when most eyeballs are still focusing on football. For our two schools, well, they're already dialed in on basketball. Let's be honest about that. But Armando Bacot, very similarly, wants those challenges. And so whereas he is a strong defender, he is more equipped and talented offensively as Trayce Jackson-Davis is on the defensive end. And so that's where I think is going to be the most interesting to watch, is when Carolina's on offense. How does that work? How do things facilitate? As you said with Indiana earlier, Carolina runs a lot of pick and roll with R.J. Davis and Armando Bacot. And how will Indiana defend that? That's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, with Trayce as well, he became last season, so 2 years ago, I'm trying to think of the nicest way to say he was not good defensively. He struggled, to say the least. And when Mike Woodson came in, when Mike Woodson initially came in, Trayce has said a couple times, he said it a lot really, he had 9 toes out the door. He was going to leave either via the draft or the transfer portal. Mike Woodson came in, and part of the convincing him to stay, he talked about this. It wasn't like he came in and told him about all the good things he did. He came in and showed him all the things he struggles with. And defense was high on that list. And Trayce went from not only like a bad defender to being on the Big Ten all-defensive team last year. And he developed as a rim protector, 2.3 blocks per game. Wow. A much smarter defender that, for the large part, didn't get into foul trouble. There were a couple big games that he struggled with that. The Purdue game, he got into foul trouble really early on, but fortunately, he's not facing a 7-4 giant like he is against Purdue in this
Zach
one.
Edey, yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully there won't be early foul trouble on either side. But it is interesting, something you talked about is kind of with this NIL era. I don't specifically know with Armando Bacot, but I know with Trayce, he's going to be getting easily 6 figures in terms of NIL money next season. And I wonder if that makes the decision to come back a little bit easier.
Absolutely.
With Trayce, he talked also about wanting to graduate, and I'm sure that played a role in it. But when you're making as much money now as these guys are, like, it makes the decision a little bit easier. And I wonder if that's going to be a trend we see, is these big men, like all of them you listed, if they're the ones that end up staying maybe a little bit longer in college basketball, because there's money to be had here now that previously wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't even name Oscar Tshiebwe, the reigning National Player of the Year, who comes back. And so it's going to be really interesting. I'm really curious to see like preseason All-America teams, because it should be both of these two guys we're talking about, Trayce, Armando Bacot. Oscar Tshiebwe is a no-brainer, and Drew Timmy's a no-brainer, maybe even Hunter Dickinson. And so typically when these teams are formed, they're trying to spread around different positions, but who do you keep off of that list with preseason All-America teams? And so that'll be really interesting to see how different sports entities construct those preseason All-America teams. And I fully expect that we'll be seeing a matchup between these two schools with 2 preseason All-Americans battling it out down in the post.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I didn't think about that aspect about. I would have to look at previous All-American teams to see if they even really care about position designations, because theoretically, and maybe even realistically, it should be about 5 big men, at least 4 of them with the Timmy, Tshiebwe, and these 2 guys. You would think
I think Dickinson's the odd man out of that group.
But even then, you have 4 big men, and whoever the 5th one ends up being is wild. So I do think, kind of in my head, I just thought, these are going to be 2 All-Americans, but you're going to have 4 All-Americans that are big men next season. But it is going to be interesting to see if that's kind of if that's just something like a trend for the short term, or if it's something that's going to be more long term. We don't even know how much longer this might be a Big Ten ACC challenge. Because,
exactly.
Kind of the underlying thing with everything in college athletics right now is the realignment that has directly impacted the Big Ten. So we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But first, I want to talk to you guys about BetOnline, which is your #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. You guys can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's MLB season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So it's been a little more than a week now that Los Angeles is now Big Ten country, which is a sentence that still I can't wrap my head around. I'm kind of interested as an outsider looking in. What's just your reaction to USC and UCLA being Big Ten schools now?
Yeah, I think it's bonkers. I mean, I think we all see the realignment coming, but I had never imagined something of this geographically odd magnitude, right? Like I've said oftentimes in the week since this happened that I think Oklahoma and Texas, when they made their announcement to the SEC, that shook everything and was crazy to me, again, as an outsider, like you're saying. But also there was a level of, well, Texas A&M's in the SEC, Missouri's in the SEC now. And so it's like, so I guess it does make some sense, at least with the way they're expanding. But then you get now this bi-coastal thing. And so this was less of a shock because of some of the other moves that have been made. But to me, this signals the biggest change in conference realignment in terms of people looking towards these super leagues, people looking to all this stuff. But for me, this is a huge win for the Big Ten because LA is the second biggest media market behind New York in the entire country. And so you just take this media package that the Big Ten already has, it's phenomenal, again, from an outsider's view, and just only increases the payout that each of the now 16 Big Ten schools are going to get.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. The timing, this was all just kind of a perfect storm, I think, with USC and UCLA. It's the Big Ten's negotiating a media rights deal right now, and on top of that, they're obviously always kind of looking to expand, kind of in this climate. And then there was an article that came out last week that UCLA was in really dire financial straits. They were going to have to. The article called it an Olympic sports Armageddon. Was kind of on the docket, and they were going to have to start cutting. It was over $100 million in debt. They were, or a deficit they had, and so they were. USC and UCLA came to the Big Ten and asked them about joining the Big Ten, basically, and they were the one that started the conversation. But now that same article says they're going to go from, I think it was around $102 million deficit, to they're going to be in a surplus within a year or two now. And
ridiculous.
The expectation is that they're going to bring in about $100 million in media rights each year. And the deal that's going to be signed in the Big Ten is going to be, for the media deal, is going to be astronomical. It was already going to be a record-breaking deal. It was going to be over $1 billion annually. The Big Ten commissioner said that himself, and that was back in the early spring, March or April. Wow. And kind of the way they're negotiating it, half of it's going to stay with Fox already, and the other half was just kind of up in the air, and they're going to sell it off to the highest bidder, basically. And so the timing was right that USC and UCLA kind of realized that and jumped in, and now, as you said, they're bringing with them the second biggest market in the country. And realistically now, if you look at the list, the Big Ten has 5 of the top 6 kind of media markets. New York, that's why they added Rutgers. Nobody in the Big Ten really wanted Rutgers, but that's why they added them. You have LA now, you have Chicago, you have the Philly area with Penn State. You don't have anything with Texas, and you probably never will, but the San Francisco area, you kind of lock down with USC and UCLA. And then Washington, D.C. is kind of in that mix as well with Maryland. So they were 9th
in 2021.
Yeah, you have all these huge media markets that are going to be within the Big Ten network now. So I was on Locked On Big Ten last week, and we kind of discussed, I'm not sure what the number's going to be for this Big Ten media right deal, like the final number. It's going to be in the billions, and I don't know that any number's going to shock me at this point, because when they were talking about it back in the spring, they mentioned that $100 million annually mark, and the Big Ten commissioner said, no, that's kind of a pipe dream, like that's not happening. That's changed. That's happening now. So how much money that adds overall to the table is going to be interesting to see. But I still can't wrap my head around that USC and UCLA are in the Big Ten. I kept expecting there to be a catch, and that somehow this was going to fall through. And just the way it happened, like it happened within like 10 hours on that Thursday, where it went from like a report to the Big Ten and USC and UCLA putting out statements that they're joining the Big Ten all within like 10 hours. And I think the way that it all played out just was like, it happened so fast that nobody could really wrap their head around it.
For North Carolina, SEC seems to make more geographical sense and maybe some competitive sense. But SEC doesn't have the depth of Olympic sports that North Carolina does. And so from that standpoint, Big Ten would make a ton more sense. Also institutionally, as like a research institution, Carolina is I don't want to say better than the SEC, but just aligns more with the Big Ten in terms of the type of institution that they are. It was interesting, Jacob. I ran a poll both on the Locked On YouTube page and my personal Twitter about, hey, what do you think is going to happen to North Carolina in all of this? And the YouTube side of it was pretty heavily weighted towards staying in the ACC. There were 443 votes. 76% said they think Carolina will stay in the ACC. 15% to the SEC. 7% to the Big Ten. But the Twitter poll, interestingly, was a lot more balanced. Fewer votes, but 46% said Carolina would stay in the ACC. 32% said SEC, and 22% said Big Ten. So that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, it's such an odd, like, as IU fan in the Big Ten, like, we can almost sit back and watch everything unfold because we're kind of in this safe spot where we're not really going anywhere. But is there kind of a sense of inevitability as somebody on the outside looking in that eventually this is just going to turn into two super conferences with the Big Ten and SEC?
It seems that way. That inevitability, I think, is a great word of like the ball is rolling and I don't know what's going to stop it. A lot of people think like, hey, if we can quit dancing with Notre Dame and formally get them into the ACC, but just their list of demands is just so high that I don't know that it makes sense. So I'm really curious to see what happens with Notre Dame. But even if you get them in as the ACC, that's still 15 teams, and you really want another one to balance it out. And so who do you go get from that? Maybe a Big East school? I just don't even know what makes a ton of sense there. The nice thing is, even though to me, there does seem to be an inevitability that something is going to happen. But for North Carolina, they are kind of in the top tier of ACC schools of what I'm hearing is desirability to either the SEC or Big Ten. Most people are saying that first tier would be North Carolina along with Clemson, Florida State, and Miami. And if you're looking at it in terms of pairs, I know obviously from the outside looking in, North Carolina would most sensibly pair with Duke or NC State. But from a desirability standpoint, I think it might actually be more Clemson or perhaps even Virginia to pair with North Carolina, while you would have like Miami and Florida State as a pair together.
Anything feels possible. Like when you're adding UCLA and USC to the Big Ten, I think you've kind of crossed the border or whatever the line was in the sand, and it feels like anything's on the table at this point. So I really don't know what the next domino to fall is, but I think we're kind of at a point of no return where this is eventually going to be two super conferences.
Yeah. And part of it with the ACC is that grant of rights deal. Like they've got a long time before they can renegotiate their media deal, and they are well far behind what the SEC and Big Ten are. And so there's kind of that side of it is, hey, that's going to affect recruiting. That's going to affect all this. And so that's a big thing for the ACC right now as well. One of the things interesting with Notre Dame really quick is I could see them joining a conference, but I could also see some other schools getting in on like, hey, this independent thing's going pretty well for them. I wonder if we could pursue that route. So I could see the independency going either way, to be honest. Like you're saying, prior to all this, West Virginia was the weirdest geographical thing to me, them being in the Big 12. But now it's clearly USC and UCLA. Anything is possible.
Yeah, looking up last week as we were kind of trying to wrap our heads around it, the closest road game for USC and UCLA is going to be Nebraska, which is about 1,500 miles.
That was my guess, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. Logically, it seems like other schools will eventually come, but money talks, and the money's been talking on this one for a while, and it's hard to turn down $100 million annually. So anything could change at this point, and it feels like anything's on the table. So that's going to be a constant conversation to monitor throughout the summer. But thanks again, guys, for making these shows your first listen every day. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Leave a quick rating and review. But most importantly, everybody have a great Monday and have a great summer.
That's right. Peace.